War hysteria has intensified, particularly with India threatening to block Pakistan's access to water.
In April 1948, India stopped a canal which was irrigating a couple of districts in Pakistan, which kind of led to a huge furor in Pakistan and paranoia that India can potentially stop the water flows into Pakistan. You see, I think that it was a very specific Cold War geopolitical moment that allowed this treaty to come to fore. And it was also the post-colonial world in a context of competition between Soviet Union and the United States. That sort of insecurity on part of Pakistan and certainly the acrimony that emerged out of 1 million fatalities that happened on both sides because of the riots that happened. So if you were to build a 500-foot, 600-foot high dam, you also know that that is the most seismically active zone in the world. There are 500 to 600 tremors a day, which are not perceptible to humans, right? Because it's a moving plate boundary.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Fiscal Focus on DawnNews English. This is Danish Khan. I'm Assistant Professor of Economics and Political Economy. And today we are addressing a pressing contemporary issue, and that is the escalating tensions between Pakistan and India following the tragic and horrific attack in Pahalgam. War hysteria has intensified, particularly with India threatening to block Pakistan's access to water. Joining me to discuss this is Professor Danish Mustafa. He's Professor of Critical Geography at King's College London, and his research focuses on critical water resource geographies. Thank you, Dr. Mustafa, for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So I want our viewers to get to know about the Indus Water Treaty. So tell us about the historical significance of Indus Water Treaty.
Historical significance, that's rather broad. I could say it's very significant, and that would be one way of putting it. What I'm trying to do is pull up the treaty in front of me as I talk to people, because people tend to discuss treaty without having ever read it. So I try not to do that. You see, I think that it was a very specific Cold War geopolitical moment that allowed this treaty to come to fore. And it was also the post-colonial world in a context of competition between Soviet Union and the United States. So in 1948, in April 1948, India stopped a canal which was irrigating a couple of districts in Pakistan. I can't remember if it was Lower Bari Doab or Upper Bari Doab, one of them two canals, which originated in India, but all of its command area was in Pakistan, which kind of led to a huge furor in Pakistan and paranoia that India can potentially stop the water flows into Pakistan. That sort of insecurity on part of Pakistan and certainly the acrimony that emerged out of 1 million fatalities that happened on both sides because of the riots that happened. It was very acrimonious kind of a divorce between the two countries, and not to mention as brief war that they fought in 1948, which kind of crystallized a certain antagonistic relationship between the two countries. Also, around the Cold War, earlier on in the 1930s, the Roosevelt administration in the United States had undertaken major water development projects, amongst them the Tennessee Valley Authority project, which was supposed to be with the idea, with the uplift of the most depressed and underprivileged part of the United States, the Tennessee River Valley, bring it up to par with the rest of the country through waterworks and series of dams and irrigation projects and so on. The administrator of that Tennessee Valley Authority was very excited by the idea of trying to replicate the model of Tennessee Valley integrated basin development across different parts of the world. Let's not even forget that there was some massive engineering expertise within the United States, major corporations that were very interested in pouring more and more concrete and undertaking and trying to demonstrate American ingenuity and technological prowess in foreign lands, if you will. So India and Pakistan were kind of prime candidates for it. When the negotiations started in 1952, both countries went to the World Bank and said, we can't really figure this out, so could you help us figure this thing out? And of course, there was quite a strong push on part of the United States to be the arbiter before the Soviets step in to try to solve things. Let us step in and try and solve things under the auspices of the World Bank. And the negotiations continued from 1952 to 1958, 59. And during that time, first the idea was an integrated basin approach, but subsequently it came to be about divorce between, just as you'd had a partition of the land, a partition of the water. The Pakistani engineers were quite mindful, the negotiating team was quite mindful that this is not a very good treaty for Pakistan's purposes because under international law and customary law and natural law, Pakistan is entitled to equitable apportionment, the principle of equitable apportionment of water amongst all the riparians of a particular river. So India stated its starting position as 100% of the eastern rivers, 70 to 80% of the western rivers, and Pakistan takes all the drainage water from India into Pakistan. That was the starting position in 1952. Pakistan's was different, which was about 50 to 60% of the eastern rivers and 100% of the western rivers, and that was the idea. In 1958, basically, we had a military coup in Pakistan, and what came to fore was basically an agglomeration of military civilian elites, technocratic elites, which hated politics and liked technical solutions. And Pakistan was a desperately poor country at the time, just as India was a desperately poor country at the time. And the idea was that the World Bank dangled the carrot of massive investments at the time, about $900 million, close to $900 million, which in today's parlance would be about $31 billion worth of injection of resources into Pakistan, which were extremely exciting for the military government at the time because they thought that pouring more concrete and building infrastructure is the pathway to development. Things haven't changed in 60 years, but never mind that. That was the thinking. And Indians kind of recognized that maybe Pakistanis are not that concerned about water. They're more interested in getting the money for the infrastructure. And the idea also, legit, somewhat with some justification, was that if you could have the technical uh, input and capital input for building of two dams and multiple link canals, presumably that would usher Pakistan on the road to development, if you will. So, despite opposition from many technocrats and many political parties, and recall that at the time Pakistan was one unit, West Pakistan was one unit. So, there was no voice of Sindh, there was no voice of Balochistan or KP. So, this was basically steamrolled through, and Ayub Khan, in his own memoirs, writes it very clearly that it was not an ideal treaty, but he maintained that we are the weaker party and we have to take what we can. And if it comes with some investment by international donors, then we'll go for it. So he signed the treaty.
Now, I mean, you provided a comprehensive historical overview. Now, and you mentioned that there has been a tendency among the elites in Pakistan to conceptualize these issues in a more technical way and uh, push away the political economy of water. And you're a great person to talk about it because you analyze these hydraulic infrastructure and waterways from a political economy and critical geography lens. So tell us about the significance of political economy settlement in Pakistan's hydraulic infrastructure.
You see, the story goes back a lot further, right? I mean, I tell my friends that, until about 150 to 170 years ago, floods were not a hazard. Floods only became a hazard once the white person showed up, right? Because floods is why Pakistan exists. That's why you have the vast alluvial fields and everything. And ask any farmer in Punjab and they'll tell you, well, floods are not a problem because after there's a flood, all the soil gets rejuvenated, the groundwater gets rejuvenated, and for 4 or 5 years we don't have to buy chemical fertilizer, which is the biggest reason for rural indebtedness, right? Similarly, when the British started building the canal colonies starting in 1864-65, starting with the Sidnai colony and the Upper Bari Doab, the idea was it was not just an enterprise in supplying water to so-called wastelands or crown wastelands, because they were very active communities of agropastoralists living within the Doabs of all the rivers, but it was also an exercise in social engineering. Because the kind of hierarchy in a feudal society like England that they were used to, that there was the big Lord Manor and then there were the tenants and everything else, well, it's not, no such thing exists in Punjab. in the pre-colonial times. So they wanted to replicate the idea that whoever is a loyal tribe and were of good service during the 1857 War of Independence, or Sepoy Mutiny, if you want to call it that, they were to be rewarded by vast agricultural estates, typically favorably located along the canal colonies, and basically the whole feudal infrastructure, social infrastructure of Pakistan was created through the British, right? So, which transformed the political economy of Punjab this day, if you will. So when the state became independent, recall that when Pakistan became independent, Punjab had a Congress ministry, had a unionist ministry. It did not have a Muslim League ministry, right? Because it was dominated by the feudal elites that were created by the British. So when you're talking, water is very much integral to the story of Pakistan and the political economy of it. Another friend of mine at Oxford undertook a nutritional survey of Pakistan and found out that the highest and the most intense levels of malnutrition in Pakistan happen to be in the irrigated districts.
Mm.
Bizarre that the nutritional levels, nutritional intake is better in Jhelum district, for example, than say Bihari, which is definitely an irrigated district. That's counterintuitive. Of course, it's not counterintuitive because when the allotments were made, they were made in the interest of production of cash crops and also for the benefit of the large landowners. For the vast majority, 99% of the people who were not huge landowners, a question of access to land and water and nutrition was very much compromised. And that continues to be the case, unfortunately. So there's a whole set of issues regarding maldistribution of resources, the structure of agrarian economy, and of course access to water, which is essentially an imprint of the colonial social engineering project that was undertaken in the 19th century.
Now, so going back to India's threat to block Pakistan's access to water, how realistic is this threat, and do we have any precedents in history of such acts by a nation state?
Um, no. Well, I mean, they used to do it at a marginal level of, a fort would have a certain water supply and it would be cut off during a siege of it. That used to happen at a micro scale, but in an entire country, no, it doesn't happen. But the second thing is that the important thing is I tell everyone that in 1982, the military regime at the time replaced geography with the Pakistan studies in schools. So whether that ushered in a more patriotic generation of Pakistan study graduates, but what it definitely delivered to you was a entire generation which is geographically illiterate. Because I think if geography was taught in schools in Pakistan, 90% of our conversations around water would be very different. Because if they were to just look at a map, a relief map of Kashmir and Pakistan and the watersheds, you will know that there is no known technology through which you can stop the entire flow of Indus. Okay. There's no known technology through which you can stop the flow of Jhelum. There's no way you can stop the flow of Chenab, right? Simple reason. Indus flows through Ladakh for a few hundred kilometers through India. If you were to build a dam, the Indus flows in about 1,000-meter deep gorge, right? So if you were to build a 500-foot, 600-foot high dam, you also know that that is the most seismically active zone in the world. There are 500 to 600 tremors a day, which are not perceptible to humans, right? Because it's a moving plate boundary. Those tremors basically destroy concrete. Secondly, Indus can move vast boulders, big boulders. That dam would not survive very long. And even when it does, if you were to build a dam, let's pretend you have like $20-30 billion of spare change sitting around, as Modi Saab does, for example, and decides to build that dam. What is he going to do with the water? If he wants to build a hydroelectric, then you have to let the water go in order for the hydroelectricity to be generated, right? All you're building is a waterfall when you're building a hydroelectric dam, right? So if you do that, then you have to let the water go. It's a run of the river kind of a project. Otherwise, there's no point, right? And when you do generate that electricity, where are you going to take that electricity? Who's going to use it in Ladakh? Where are you going to take it? All the way to Punjab from northern Kashmir? Okay, are you going to irrigate the water in order to really deprive Pakistan of water? Where are you going to irrigate? A 10,000, 15,000 foot high plateau with subarctic conditions with irrigation water? Why are you going to do that? So that's out. In Jhelum, where are you going to build the dam to stop the water? If you're going to divert it, where are you going to divert it to? right? The only place you can build a dam is in the Odi Gorge. If you build a 600-foot high dam there, that submerges the entire Kashmir Valley. That's the end of Kashmir. You want to do that? And even when you do, if it's hydroelectric, obviously you have to let the water go. And if it is irrigation, you can only irrigate from what is downstream of the dam. Downstream of the dam is Pakistan. So if they want to build us canals into Pakistan, they're most welcome to do so, right? And secondly, there is no land to irrigate there. It's all mountains.
Hmm.
Similarly, Chenab enters Pakistan at Hedmarala, right?
Hmm.
Upstream of that is Baglihar. If they want to irrigate something from any dam on there, where are they going to irrigate? Pakistan? And if it's hydroelectric, as Baglihar is, then you have to let the water go. And if you want to stop the water, the dam will probably survive 48 hours. And
Makes
then
sense.
it will be gone.
Okay. So, and this is directly tied to this 20th century conception, the modernist conception of seeing human nature and non-human nature in terms of ontologically separate and not in terms of dialectical unity. And the whole idea is to command nature and to control it and pivot it in our own ways. And as you rightly pointed out, it seems that can be our desire as human species, but we have to be in sync with non-human nature in order to be effective. And I remember I saw one of your videos where you talk about these like the idea of the British colonial state. It was a very ambitious idea, but it really wrecked our geographies in Indian subcontinent, especially in Pakistan. So tell us about that.
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think it's a human desire at all. Humans never had this desire for about. Let's just pretend that modern humans with the same hardware have been around for 200,000, 300,000 years, right? They didn't have that desire till about 500 years ago,
Agreed, agreed. It's a more
right? So
modernist capitalist.
it's a more of a capitalist kind of a thing, and even then, it is a very deeply European kind of a thing.
Agreed.
And our post-colonial elites are more in love with the white folk science and white folks worldview than even the white folks are anymore.
Mm,
Even the Europeans are like, "What the hell? This doesn't work." No, 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 no. But we really want to be. We want to talk. It's kind of like mangy monkeys in Jungle Book. I
mm,
want to walk like you. I want to talk like you.
mm,
Create fire like you. So it's really quite sad, to be honest with you. It's really quite sad, the allegiance to those colonial sort of tropes of human environment relations, which are completely alien to to the ways that ordinary people live with the river. I mean, ask the fisher communities living on these rivers, what is their relationship? Ask the people who live on the sides, on the banks of these rivers, and what these rivers mean to them. But those are the sorts of conversations that don't matter because rivers to the state, post-colonial states, and not just Pakistan, anywhere, are basically cubic meters of water flowing.
mhm,
Very little understanding of the actual science of it, very little understanding of the surface groundwater interactions, very practical indifference, in fact, hostility to the ecology of it.
mhm,
And more than that, what those rivers mean to the most vulnerable and the poorest and the weakest segments of the society, to
mm.
their cosmologies and their stories and through their livelihoods and all of that.
Makes sense. And
If you can build a golf course, you've become developed. That seems to be the paradigm.
yes, yes, and gated housing enclaves and
Not to
shopping malls
mention,
in these in
not to
Pakistan.
mention.
And you have done extensive work on issues of flood and climate change vulnerabilities in the
Mhm.
context of Pakistan as well. And we hear a lot about Pakistan being one of the most vulnerable countries uh, in terms of climate change. Uh, why is that, and what can we do about it?
I don't know if it's the most vulnerable. Which country is not vulnerable?
Hmm.
Right? I mean, you can say, oh, we are a lot more vulnerable than Burkina Faso. Okay, I'll take your word for it. But what are the metrics on which you decide, right? Or we're a lot less vulnerable or more vulnerable than Bhutan. I don't know if we are or we're not. It's just a place-based kind of a thing.
Yeah, we have like climate refugees in the US, Louisiana in the US, the whole islands are being underwater.
Exactly. Exactly. So I don't know what that means. You
Okay.
are vulnerable. Obviously, you're vulnerable. But I mean, there's a way you can think about climate. Is climate an external biophysical shock, as if prior to that everything was okay? Our wonderful life is being interrupted by climate change.
Mm,
And what is it that climate change is going to do that colonialism did not,
mm,
that neoliberal capitalism did not? Ask people who have been dispossessed by these housing societies, along the peripheries of the Karachi, the peripheries of Multana or the peripheries of other places and say, oh, you should worry about climate change. Like, seriously?
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
sitting here dispossessed from my land, my livelihood, my identity, and everything else, and you want me to be afraid of climate change?
Mhm.
So a friend of mine was telling me he was in this maternity ward in district hospital in Mitti. The
Mhm.
hemoglobin level of women who were giving birth in that hospital was 4 to 5 on average. It's supposed to be 12.
Mhm.
Explain to that woman that, oh, you're really vulnerable to climate change. And she'd be like, mate, I don't know what you're smoking. Whatever it is, why aren't you sharing? Because I'd really like to have that Kool-Aid.
Mhm.
There
Nice.
are deeper political, economic, and social injustice kinds of questions. Climate change is important. Climate change is going to exacerbate. But exacerbate, I mean, in the sense, if you address the vulnerabilities of here and now, inequalities of here and now, the dysfunctional human, non-human, and human-human relationships today, you automatically adjust and adapt and to the kinds of challenges that climate change is going to throw at you. But if you want to build a golf course in the middle of the desert and a gated community, then of course you're going to expose yourself to much greater harm.
Mhm. Now, as you probably following, there's a war hysteria and the jingoism across both countries in Pakistan and India is rising. But as progressives and critical scholars, uh, and what can progressives in both India and Pakistan can do to in normalize things and focus on these issues, the marginalized communities and their socioeconomic emancipation, rather than focusing on these geostrategic games. What would be your suggestion or recommendations for progressives and those who are critical thinkers?
Well, tell different stories, right? There's a storyline. India is devious and diabolical, and it's never accepted Pakistan. It wants to invade Pakistan, and Pakistan, oh my God, we are the scions of the great Mughals and what have you, and we're going to show them who's boss and who's got more testosterone than them, and all the rest of it. That's what it's a huge crisis of masculinity, right? In South Asia, we both have to just hose down the entire river valley with their testosterone. So my view is that we need to tell a different story, and we need to tell it widely, and we need to organize politically and try and unsettle the plot lines. I tell everyone that, about 20 years ago, the water establishment in Pakistan would not even acknowledge the likes of me's existence. Like,
Mhm.
who, what? What are you talking about? Are you an engineer? Get out of my face. I'm not even listening to you. I can't hear you. Today, I'm happy to report that they hate me and hate my kind. So that's a huge progress. From being non existence to I have become someone that they absolutely detest. So the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. So we've made some progress where the voices are being heard. It is threatening the orthodoxy, and the standard narrative is being destabilized. And I think it's a slow progress. No one is wearing a cape and a hero's thing that I'm going to fix everything on my own steam. We have to do it collectively. We have to do it as alliances, and we have to keep repeating the message over and over and over again. I'm repeating this message for the sixth time today, and I'm doing it precisely because the story needs to be told. I'm not saying that I'm absolutely right. Maybe I'm wrong. That's fine. But at least I'm not prevaricating.
Mhm. Oh, thank you. I mean that makes sense because the shared interests of the working classes and marginalized communities and peasants in both India, Pakistan, and Kashmir are uh, they have more in common rather than the the differences. And maybe elites think in different way. They have their own political agenda. So now in the last question about the post-colonial state you mentioned in Pakistan, how would you describe the similarities and differences in the post-colonial approach, post-colonial states approach, uh, vis-a-vis the British colonial state approach in terms of hydraulic infrastructure in Pakistan?
Well, I'm not a historian. That's not my strong suit. I know as much about the history of it as I had to know with regard to water. I think that there's not much of a difference in terms of the approach of the water bureaucracies of the two countries to what water is. Uh, it's all about engineering. It's all about diversion. It's all about large infrastructure, because there's also a big political economy of large infrastructure projects, right? There are contracts given out. There are international contractors in there. There's a reason why, many of the leaders of the respective big engineering outfits of the government have to run off overseas once their tenure is over because
Mm,
there's a gravy train that is involved in these things. So I just think that there are depressing similarities between the two countries. There are depressing similarities in how they negotiate difference and work out their relationship to water. And the Modi government is probably one of the most fascistic neoliberal governments in the world. Fascism and neoliberalism go hand in hand. I wish I could claim some superiority in case of Pakistan, but I'd let the Pakistanis decide how they would characterize the leadership in the country, not just today, but what has been the case for a few decades in the past. So I just think that we're seeing a situation globally where neoliberalism out of ideas, the 400-year story of Western hegemony is coming to an end. And as usual, the two countries are lagging behind in realizing that we are at an inflection point in history where many of the certainties of Western superiority and global South's subservience,
mm,
intellectual subservience more than anything else. I mean, not just talking about material, financial, or technological. I'm talking about the psychological and intellectual subservience of the global South is coming to an end. Either they recognize the changing winds and try to put themselves ahead of that, or as usual, they take another 20, 30, 40 years to figure out, oh, the world has changed and we didn't realize it. It's a
Thank
choice.
you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Danish Mustafa, for sharing your insightful perspective. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Until next time, this is Danish Khan signing off from Fiscal Focus on Dawn News English.